This first session is called The Internet Blessing or Curse. And I'm delighted that we have as our chair Darryl Plecase, the Parliamentary Secretary for Seniors to the BC Minister of Health. So I'm going to call Darryl, who will...
Thanks very much, Gloria. Gloria was telling me when I was coming in this morning about her beginnings in her career and focus on gerontology and how she was advised by I won't mention the university, it wasn't SFU, but about how her dean was telling her when she was expressing her interest in gerontology that it was just a passing fad. Aging was just a passing fad, and I thought, whoa, did they miss the boat on that? Because as all of you know, right now we have, in British Columbia, we have 750,000 seniors. And we're expecting by 2030 that we're going to have 1.5 million seniors. So I'm really looking forward to the panel today. And let me just tell you who the panel is, and you will all, I think, have an introduction to them by virtue of your handout. But let me just say again, we have Kevin Smith here. Kevin is a lawyer with the BC Centre for Elder Advocacy and Support. And BC Centre for Elder Advocacy and Support is a key stakeholder in elder abuse prevention, and it operates the Seniors Abuse and Information Line. And then we have Detective Stephen Wilson from Delta Police, and he's an active member of the Financial Abuse Action Group of the Council to Reduce Elder Abuse. And then we have Julie down here, Julie Robillard, from the National Core for Neuroethics and the Djavad Mowafaghian Center for Brain Health at UBC. And I've had to say that center's name before, and I'm sorry that I'm mispronouncing it. I know I am, but they do such great work. So, as I said, over the next 20 years, we're going to have this incredible increase in the number of seniors. And in fact, the number of seniors is actually going to outnumber the number of people that we have under 18. It's going to be a very dramatic shift in terms of the demographics that we have here. And of course, that's going to present all kinds of challenges, and it's going to require an effort from all parts of, all levels of government. And certainly our government is very attuned to this, and which is why we have a Parliamentary Secretary for Seniors as part of what we're doing. And in terms of planning ahead and thinking of the kinds of things we ought to be doing, and as many of you might know, the whole effort is a focus on what we can do to improve the quality of life for seniors, and in all kinds of ways. Obviously on the health front, obviously we want to do that on the safety front, and of course when we talk about on the safety front, elder abuse is very much on our minds. So some of the things that we're going to be doing and are doing is we're launching an elder abuse prevention strategy. We've invested earlier $1.4 million in the BC Association of Community Response Networks, and just more recently another $2.7 million this year. And some of you might have met Sherry Baker and her staff. There she is waving down there. She can tell you about all the wonderful stuff that they're doing. And they operate more than 110 networks throughout the province to help improve access to services. And it's all about increasing awareness of abuse and neglect. And some of you might have caught or picked up a copy. I noticed that we're out of copies there, but the government has published a book on seniors. Does anybody have it that they can wave it there? There it is. This is a very useful guide, information guide to the kinds of services that are available to seniors in the province. And we've also just provided 10.7 million to the Alzheimer's Society of BC's First Link program to support individuals and families affected by Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And we're creating a dementia action plan that supports patient-centered care for people with dementia, including training for staff and support to enable them to remain at home in their communities where possible. And then we've passed the first of its kind legislation to enable the creation of a seniors advocate in BC. Isabel McKenzie, if you haven't met her, you should. She's such a wonderful lady, and she's just come out with her a recent report talking about what we can do better in terms of assisted living, complex care, and again, all about what we can do to ensure that seniors can be more likely to live at home and live at home in a very quality way. So her main thing, of course, is to provide a strong voice for advocates and to identify solutions to issues confronting seniors and make recommendations to us on what we can do better. So I'll just leave it at that for now, and hope you all enjoy what we're going to hear this morning. And then after we hear from our speakers, we'll open it up for questions. Okay? Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Darryl, for the introduction. And Steve and I are going to talk about online frauds and scams that are targeting seniors. And I think we can't get into it in great detail given the time limitations, but we want to canvass some of the issues. So we are going to quickly introduce ourselves, talk about older adults and internet, some common internet frauds and scams, ways to beat these, ways to prevent identity theft on the internet, and some resources, reporting, and remedies. So I'm, as Darryl said, I'm a staff lawyer with the BC Centre for Elder Advocacy and Support. Part of our work is outreach programs educating seniors about frauds and scams. And Steve's with the Economic Technical Crime Unit.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I don't know if I'd like to stand up and walk around a little bit, so hopefully everybody can hear me. So I've been with Delta Police Department for about 8 years now. My background is financial crimes. Elder abuse is a very important issue to me, so I go around the province talking about it and providing outsourced research materials and just trying to get as much prevention information out there as possible. So we don't have a lot of time in the presentation, so I will be sticking around after. If anybody has any questions, please come up and see me. I'd be more than happy to hear from you. Thank you.
Yeah, and same for me, if you have questions afterwards. So just quickly, my organization, we have the Seniors Abuse and Information Line, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we have victim services for older adults. We have legal services, and we do outreach, as I say, including about financial literacy and frauds and scams. An interesting statistic here, Canadians are the world's biggest internet users. We're an average of 43.5 hours online per month. It's almost twice the global average. And seniors the use of the internet by seniors has tripled in the last decade, well, since 2013. And seniors have some wishes in terms of the internet. They want to manage their health remotely. That's a big thing for seniors. 75% want online access to health records. They seem to be ahead of the game compared to the medical establishment in terms of e-health records and online appointment scheduling, etc. But when seniors use the internet, their slower speed of adoption means they're easier targets for frauds and scams. They're less familiar with some of the less visible aspects of browsing online in terms of firewalls and security certificates and built-in add-on protection or virus protection for your browser. And seniors as a group, studies have shown they're actually more trusting than other people. And of course, they also might have diminished capacity or impaired executive functioning, and so they're, again, more susceptible to being taken advantage of in some cases. Online frauds and scams, three main goals for them. First of all, they want you to send them your money. Second is they want to get your personal ID information. They want to steal your identity, and I'll talk a little more about that. And they also want to hack into your computer and use your computer as part of a farm or a multi-computer kind of effort to spam out to the world. And one of the big spam emails, and I'm sure many of you have received one from the Nigerian prince or a British lottery official or somebody saying, I've got this big wad of money and I got to get it out of the country. Can you help me? Send me your banking information and I'll share 25% of $1 million just for that help. And they're getting more sophisticated. Those ones, you could see by the bad language, etc. This is really nothing official, but they're getting a lot better with better proofreading, logos, backgrounds, etc. and the return to email addresses that almost look legitimate. One big one now is a Canada Revenue Agency is being used. There's fraudulent communication, emails, text messages, online forms from Canada Revenue Agency. And I saw this on the national news last night, CBC. Canada Revenue Agency actually tested their own employees and sent their own employees a phishing email, and more than 20% of the CRA employees actually clicked on it and fell for it, and it's a little embarrassing to the CRA that internally they're not even good at protecting themselves. Another one, and this one's pretty nervy, is the CSIS email. You're told you got porn on your computer. You're told that you're sending spam messages with terrorist motives from your computer, whatever terrorist motives are. And in order to solve this, they've locked your computer and you send them $100 and they'll unlock your computer for you, and somehow everything will be fine, I guess. There are lottery proceeds scams. They claim to have won the lottery, but there's no bank account to deposit the money, and they want, in exchange for using your account, you send them a good faith payment, and of course you never hear from them again. Reverse mortgage scams. I don't know if you all know what a reverse mortgage is, but if you're older, 65 plus, you can get a reverse mortgage on your house. It's kind of like a home equity loan, except you never have to make any principal payments or interest payments. The interest just kind of accumulates on your home's equity, and you get that money. They're much more popular than they used to be, certainly in the States. And scammers are now taking advantage of that popularity. A lot of people, of course, in this city, for example, are land rich and cash poor. They're sitting on huge equity in their home, and a reverse mortgage looks very attractive. Online auctions, there's all kinds of scammers involved with online auctions in terms of not delivering what they said they're going to sell you. It may be black market goods. There may be shill bidding to drive the price up as you're bidding for something. It says free stacking. That should be fee stacking. They add on fees when you go to pay the purchase price. And there's, of course, misrepresentations. Online dating. More and more seniors are using the internet for online dating, and it's a perfect way to hide fraudulent intentions, trying to entrap victims with using romantic intentions. Investment scams. I'm sure many of you have seen the ads through the Invest Right BC, where the woman is calling out the guy who's making these exorbitant promises about you're going to make 12 or 15%, no risk, just give me your money, and it's often fake gemstones, uninhabitable property, or shares in non-existent or shell companies. Then, of course, there's also the pyramid schemes where they do offer 12 or 15%, but that's because the money that goes in is paying for the people who put it in before, and it's just a pyramid scheme, and eventually that pyramid's going to collapse. Another one is the travel packages. Seniors have disposable income. They have bucket lists. They want to go travel, see the world, and so they can be scammed by low-cost travel packages that are probably much more actually than market rates, or they're substandard accommodation, or the services promised just don't happen. Counterfeit prescription drugs. A lot of seniors have to pay for expensive drugs, although a lot of people have pharmacare, but some people go online to look for better prices for medications. But these counterfeit drugs can be dangerous, and they might actually harm you rather than help you. Fake charities. Many times fake charities will pop up after a natural disaster like in Nepal, and also around the holiday season. People are feeling more kind-hearted and generous, and scammers ramp up the fraudulent charity scams at that time of the year. There's also just, these ads you'll see, on Facebook, for example. Overstocked iPads are 90% off. Do you really believe you can get 90% off on an iPad, even the first version of it? But so then we're going to talk a little bit about phishing. As you may know, phishing is where an email is dressed up to look like a legitimate email coming from a bank or other companies, etc. It may have the logo on there, as I said, and it'll be all dressed up, and you really have to kind of look at it carefully. And I don't know how well you can see that or see what might be fishy. Maybe Steve can help us out here. What would you say was fishy on this one here?
Well, like at any times you've seen stuff like this, always be careful. Do due diligence when you're looking at stuff like this. There's no reason for them to contact you for information. If they do, it'd be someone with a phone or ask you to go into the branch. But you can't hear me? Sorry about that. But, can I take it off here? All right, there we go. This type of activity is really, really easy to do. A lot of people think it's really complicated, but it's not. It's a simple software program. What I usually do when I go to conferences and speak, I'll use the actual website from the conference, and I'll do a bogus website and set it up and show them how easy it is to do. When you actually click links on the bogus website, it goes to where I'm asking for your information. It looks legit, but it's not. So you really, really have to be careful when you're dealing with stuff like this.
Okay, and the next one here, for example, RBC. As it demonstrates here, if you want to find out whether this one's legitimate or not, one way to do that is sort of hover your mouse over the link that they want you to click on. If you hover your mouse over that, you'll see the real address as opposed to what they've put up there as what the address is. It's very easy to create links in documents and in emails where the link you see on a page says one thing, but the real internet address underneath that link can be a different thing. And that's great for shortening long addresses on the one hand, but it's also great for frauds and scams where it looks like a legitimate address on the page or on the email, but when you click on it, it's taking you someplace completely different.
Yeah, well, pardon me, just to add into that, and to give you an idea how common this type of stuff is, I get probably 8 to 10 of these a day, and actually spent most of yesterday at work dealing with a gentleman who got an email from Canada Revenue Agency twice, and he was a victim twice. And then after he responded the second time, he decided to phone us and ask us if it was legit, and it's not. So it's really, really common.
Now there are some variations on phishing. All these things, there's variations on a theme. There's what they call spear phishing. I'm a scuba diver. I'm not a big fan of spear fishing. It's bad for the fish, but this is where they go after one person in particular as opposed to phishing, which is kind of like scattergun approach. And they friend somebody on a Facebook or other social media like MySpace, and then they send you a message through the internal messaging on that social media, and then you click on some link to malicious code. Farming is a version of it where they actually set up a whole website, as Steve was saying, that looks exactly like the real thing, using the logo, using all the background, etc., and even use a fake SSL certificate, which I'm sure most of you are aware of. You know, you look for the HTTPS for the security. They even use fake SSL certificates, so it is HTTPS on that website. Another variation on the theme is called vishing, voice phishing, or spoofing. People get an email saying, you know, don't click on a link, or, you know, this is safe, call us. And they leave a phone number. And so you call that number and it sounds like an official Royal Bank staff person, you know, please enter your credit card information at the prompt, and you key in your credit card number and your expiry date and your security code from the back of your card. And they're using some voice over internet protocol phone system that can actually record all those phone strokes, and now they have all of your credit card information. So many people are told, you know, don't click on internet emails, Grandma, just deal with the bank over the phone. Well, Grandma says, okay, great, I'm dealing with the bank over the phone, and puts in all of her credit card information, and bang, you've been scammed again. I'm sure many of you have seen this on your computer at some point, a pop-up warning, your computer has been infected, and you better click here and get the software to get rid of that virus you've got on your computer now. And it's not a virus, it's just a pop-up to get you to click again. And then there's the ongoing Microsoft operating system folks calling you up saying, you know, we found out your computer is affected, and let's go down into the bowels of your computer and we'll show you how it's infected and how we can help you, and you're getting scammed. I had them call me about 12 times. Eventually I would say to them, this is great, thank you very much, I'll go get my credit card information. I put the phone down and walk away. And they finally stopped calling me. So that's one way to beat that particular fraud and scam. In general, of course, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. Watch out for special offers or deals, and don't sign up online about these things. Don't provide your personal or financial information on you unless you've really verified the credentials, or maybe check with other people. I mentioned the folks who do the ads from InvestRight with the BC Securities Commission. They've now come out with this whole fraudster fighter toolkit on their website for fighting frauds and scams. And now I want to just talk for a second about identity theft. With a lot of these scams, I say, either are to extract money from you or to extract all of your personal information from you. Not necessarily your credit card information, just your name, address, etc., and your bank account number. With that information, they can apply for credit cards, loans, they can open a bank account in your name, they can write bad checks, get government documents, and even put a mortgage on your house. So identity theft is a pretty serious concern as well. One of the ways to prevent identity theft online, we talked about the HTTPS up on the internet address, but there are certificates that are legitimate and there are certificates that are questionable. And if you keep your browser software updated, it will pop up with this warning and say, this is not a secure connection. This certificate really can't be trusted because it's not done through the proper channels. It's been self-signed. And on the bottom, you have a choice, get me out of here, which is good advice, or add an exception, and they say don't add an exception unless you really know what you're doing. There is a relatively new organization, the Canadian Identity Theft Support Center. I think Steve said, you're saying it's out of UBC?
Yeah, I think it's out of UBC actually, isn't it? You don't, oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, it's an awesome site actually. I didn't even know about it until a couple of months ago, and I was clicking around and found it. It's got some phenomenal information, so if you get a chance, take a look at it.
And a couple of the resources on there, there's a seniors identity theft protection guide. And if you do get yourself in a situation where they've stolen your identity and are using it because you can see changes to your bank account or you're being called up, they have a victim toolkit how to respond to an identity theft. So there's some good resources on that site, as Steve says. And I want to mention about tracking and cookies. You may think, okay, I'm going to use private browsing. That will protect me. Everything will be deleted after I do the browsing. And they tell you to do that, for example, when you do online banking, use private browsing, and then once your session is finished, everything gets deleted from that session. It's not true. There are some tracking technologies that can still find information on your computer even after these private sessions, or even if you've said no cookies on your computer. Don't put any of the information from that session onto my hard drive somewhere. There is a website called, it may be hard to read there, donottrack.us. It has more information on how you can prevent tracking. So that's sort of a laundry list to quickly go through of various frauds and scams, and you can get a sense of some of the ingenuity of these people setting these things up. What can be done? We tell seniors, call our Seniors Abuse and Information line. There's also the lawyer referral service to talk about what your legal remedies might be. You can file an official complaint with the Better Business Bureau, the Office of Privacy Commissioner. There's also reporting frauds and scams to the local police. Don't use the 911 number for this, but call them up and let them know about the fraud or scam. Notify your bank or financial institution, credit card company. InvestRight BC, earlier I was talking about that whole scam toolkit they have. Notify them or notify the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center. And they also recommend calling up these two national credit bureaus and telling them, you've been a victim of a fraud, and they will put a fraud alert on your credit report. I don't know if you have anything.
Yeah, actually, speaking of that, so Equifax kind of TransUnion, how many people in this room actually get your credit reports once a year? 2, 3? So they're free. You're entitled by law to have, I think, at least 1, possibly 2 a year, and you can contact them and they provide it. That's the #1 resource for you to provide identity theft, because they'll have the information about all the new loans and mortgages that you have before you will. You're only going to find out about it after you get a call from the bank that you've defaulted on it and they're coming after you. And believe me, and I've seen this happen, it's not a simple phone call and you get a file number and then it all goes away. They're going to come after you. So this is, Equifax and TransUnion are probably the 2 best resources. Find out what your credit report is. Get it once a year. See what's going on with your credit history.
And of course, the other big thing is always keep an eye on your bank account. If you do online banking or what have you, take a look at your account, see if there's any transactions you can't identify. So in terms of legal remedies, civil law, you might be able to take the business or individual to court to try to get the money back. That can be difficult. There may not be any money left. You may never be able to track down this particular fraudster. scammer, because it's done on the internet, they could be anywhere on God's green earth, although they're probably in hell's half acre somewhere, really. But it's hard to find them, and they may be in some third world country somewhere. But you can get legal advice about it. Under criminal law, there's possible charges that can be laid: theft, forgery, extortion, fraud. But again, your first step for that, contact the police or the anti-fraud center. I mean, I have some bad news about this for most people who ask me about what to do. It's probably, closing the barn door long after the horse is gone, and there's very little in the way of remedies. Our biggest efforts are in being proactive about teaching older adults about these dangers, about frauds and scams, and trying to prevent it from happening, because once it's happened, it's very unlikely there's going to be any way of recouping that money. And maybe, I don't know if you have any...
Yeah, and actually I'll add a little bit to that. The key there is being proactive. We have to prevent this from happening, because once it's happened, like, the chances of getting your funds recovered are even worse, whatever it might have happened. I'm seeing maybe 1 out of 100 recoveries. And we're talking losses in some cases over $1 million. So when it's gone, it's gone. Some of it's local, a lot of it's international. We're seeing boiler rooms, Vancouver, Toronto, and they're tied in with organizations in the UK, Malaysia, North Africa, and the money it doesn't stay in one spot, it's constantly moving. So it's next to impossible for us to get their money back.
So that's our perhaps disheartening presentation for this morning. And if anybody has some question they're just dying to ask now that they can't wait until the end of the next session, you can ask it now. Otherwise, we'll go on to the next session and have some minutes perhaps for questions at the end of our hour.
We can take a few questions now. Go ahead.
Is it Martha?
I was just going to say, should we all be terrified of this? How commonly are people caught out?
That's a good question. Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't like to scare people. I mean, the internet, social media is a wonderful thing. It's here, it's going to stay, and it's only going to get more part of our lives. I mean, we now live, I tell people we live in a cyber village. We have basically 2 lives now, and it's becoming more an online life for the most part. It's always going to be there. I see more and more scams and stuff all the time. You just have to use a bit of common sense. Quick example of what I do is when I go to a presentation, I'll go into the audience and I'll ask somebody for their wallet. And the person gives me the wallet and I'll take it up at the front, and I always ask to say, why'd you give it to me? Well, you asked me for it. That's how easy it is, because we're such a trusting group of people. I mean, you have to do a little bit of due diligence. I mean, it's no different if you went to a coffee shop and some stranger came up and started talking to you, you'd think there's something wrong. So the same thing online. If you're getting something that sounds unusual or looks unusual or an unusual phone call, think twice before you react to it.
Hi, I'm Bill Kearns. I used to be the ISO for our institute and used to have to deal with these types of issues with our faculty, which numbered around about 400 people. Do you have any advice with regard to changes in cognition of older adults as they perhaps begin a process of, say, moving into a first stage or early MCI or cognitive impairment? And as far as addressing computer access like this? Because we went through this kind of phase with my father. We were concerned after he started getting online that he was going to be contacted by the Nigerian prince, and
Yeah.
there went your entire legacy.
Yeah, a really good question with the online stuff. And I say this all the time when I present to the children: don't pay attention to what your parents are doing. I mean, it's because when you're busy in your life and you don't really pay a lot of attention is when they start getting attention from fraudsters and scammers and people that are interested in criminal activity. And what I find more times than not is they don't actually know what's been happening until their parents have passed on and they're dealing with the estate, and all of a sudden it goes into probate way too late. As far as the online stuff, same thing I do with my kids. I know what my daughter does with her cell phone. I know what she does online because I've set it up so whatever she does, I can see. And she's aware of that. And we have a house rule that basically if she has a cell phone or she's on the internet, the computer's in the kitchen, her cell phone is unlocked at all times. To an extreme version of that, what I've seen some people do is they actually take their kid's cell phone at the end of the month and they do a data dump on it. And at the beginning of the month, there's a hash code that tells you what data's on that. And it's very, very high tech, but it's easy to do. And what it does, if there's any changes at all, any additional data added into the phone, like new phone numbers or other stuff that she's added in, it'll change the hash value at the end of the month. And then she has to explain what that change in hash value is, otherwise she loses her phone. So really easy to set up that type of stuff. I've actually never heard of anyone doing it for their parents, but that's a phenomenal idea, something to look at.
It's interesting that, of course, you got the whole civil liberties issue of what you make the determination that they really need to have surveillance.
Yeah, phenomenal question.
Wayne Yulian, editor of the Retired Vancouver Teachers Association newsletter. And I think maybe this is one of the most far-reaching topics that I've heard so far at this conference. And I guess I'm worried that we typically send out 90% of our newsletters go through the mail, and 10% now, maybe closer to 15%, are starting to be received via the internet. And I have been pushing for more internet use, and we're starting to see it. But generally, we hand out pieces of paper telling people what to do or what not to do. And I'm wondering, I guess, two questions. One, is there one website that is designed for seniors to walk them through how to protect themselves? A simple, direct kind of walkthrough. And if not, is there some way we could orchestrate a face-to-face session like this for Vancouver seniors, and maybe they're already happening and I just don't know about them, that can talk about the phishing, the weird things that are happening, unbeknownst, just because of ignorance. They have no idea, and then they get turned off the whole idea of using the internet.
Well, to quickly answer, my organization, as I say, we do a lot of workshops about frauds and scams in general, including online scams, and about phishing and about ways to protect yourself online. Certainly the RCMP has a very good guide on seniors and being secure as a senior and ways to protect yourself, including online scams and other scams and frauds. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, as far as a resource goes for that seniors can go to, like a workshop on how to be safe online, like a basic how-to guide, come and see me after and I'll give you some information on that.
So maybe we could just have one more question, otherwise I'm going to get fired in my job as moderator here.
We may not be able to find an answer for this, but in
But
the
we'll
world
come
of
back to the fellow who is just up there. We'll come back after to your questions. Thanks. Go ahead.
I'm a part-time researcher with SFU in Department of Gerontology, and then in the world of research, we always need data. I do a lot of cold calls, and to my surprise, a lot of elderly people are very supportive, and we do need data, right? And then sometimes I wonder, they're really trusting. They're telling me, like obviously it's legit, and I tell them, oh, you can go on this website, but they're not going to be able to do that because by and large, they don't. And then in turn, on the receiving end, and a lot of times I say, okay, online survey, they can be very legitimate, but I don't want to do that. But at the same time, I feel very guilty because this is something that contributes, and we need to be part of it. So I'm struggling. What do I do? Do I do the survey? I don't know. I guess we have no answer for that, but I struggle.
Thank you.
As I said at the beginning of the presentation, as people get older, they become more trusting. You would think the world would make them less trusting, especially the internet world, but older adults get more and more trusting as they get older, and they actually get happier as they get older. Again, why, I'm not sure, but so that's just one of the issues with seniors is how to help them when they're so trusting. Anyway. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin and Stephen. That was great. it really is frightening, isn't it, when you think of what could be. Just to put it in perspective for you, somebody was telling me a week ago that in government, it's just at the legislature, we have thousands of people trying to hack into our computers every single day. Like, it is pretty widespread. I mean, there's constantly people out there trying to get into your computer, so we need to know more about it. So, Julie, Robillard.
It's pretty close. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today, and I'll be shifting gears a little bit, although the information you might find no less terrible. And so my role, I'm assistant professor at UBC, and I study online health resources for dementia. And so these resources, I find, are at the intersection of aging and tech, but there's also an ethical component. And I'd like to bring some of these issues to your attention today. So the first thing I want to do is start with a little scenario that you may be familiar with. Let's imagine an older adult, and he's having some health concerns. And an example I like to use is that he went to a dinner party last night, and his friends were reminiscing about high school, and he realized that he could no longer name his high school friends. So he's concerned that this may be the start of dementia. So if he's like 80% of the population, he's going to turn to what I like to call Dr. Google. And he might Google his symptoms, or he might look for a support forum where others are experiencing sort of similar things he's experiencing. And we know from the world of online health research that depending on the condition that this person is Googling, half to all of the information will be of poor quality. That is incredible. Not for all conditions, but for many conditions, this person is likely to encounter information that is of poor quality. And we'll talk in a little bit about what I mean by bad quality. Despite the fact that the information is very likely to be of bad quality, 60% of people still use that information to make decisions about their health. This is a scenario that goes on millions of times per minute, all over the world. Young adults do this, older adults do this, and in my lab, we're very interested in learning every step of the process, what's happening, and how we can guide the process to improve health outcomes. So for the rest of my talk, I will convince you, I hope, that online health information matters. I'll talk a little bit about my research looking at self-assessments for Alzheimer's disease, and then I'll conclude with how to tackle these ethical challenges that we'll come across during my talk. So it's no surprise to anyone in this room that everybody is increasingly engaging online. For older adults is the dark blue line at the bottom. You can see over half of them, as of 2012, are spending time online. This data is already old. The numbers continue to increase. And I think we had some statistics in the earlier talk about how much time people spend online. It's really an incredible amount of time. We know that one of the things people do online is look for health information. Google will receive 2 million queries in the next 60 seconds. I usually like to give an amount of queries on Google for the duration of my talk, but today it would be some billion amount of queries. We also know that 80% of internet users seek health information online, so this is something that a number that also continues to rise. Another behavior I'm interested that people like to do online is self-assessing their health. So increasingly, people want to find out if they or if someone they know suffers specifically from a condition. And so they're going to turn to the online environment for that. Again, they might Google their symptoms. But what's happening is that the online environment is becoming increasingly responsive to this demand and is putting out tests. So you can test yourself. And the kinds of things you can test yourself for that are really available online quite a bit are the conditions that we think are easy to diagnose. So those are things like depression, Alzheimer's disease, anything that you imagine you could get at with a few questions, right? For depression, are you feeling sad this morning? Boom, you have depression. Alzheimer's disease, I'm going to show you 5 pictures. Can you remember the 5 pictures? Boom, you have memory issues. We know, those of us that work in the healthcare context, that this is not the case, that Alzheimer's disease is not easy to diagnose. But the online environment is completely unregulated, so it's sort of a free-for-all when it comes to these tests. So why do we care? Why does my lab spend all this time studying online health information and online health-seeking behaviors? It's because what we do online has a very important impact on what we do offline. And sometimes that impact can be positive. Maybe I'm looking at a support forum for caregivers and I become a better caregiver as a result. That's fantastic. Maybe I read an article about exercising and I start an exercise program. Those are positive outcomes. But the impact can also be negative. And I don't have to tell anyone here that the supplement industry is alive and well online. Older adults often take several medications. These supplements can have an interaction with some of the medications, but all of this happens outside of the healthcare context. And so the impact of these online behaviors can really have a negative outcome. And right now, we don't really know where this balance is heavier. Is it heavier to the positive or heavier to the negative? And so we continue to research these kinds of behaviors. We know that the online environment poses old and new ethical challenges, and I'm going to put a few questions here that we'll answer later at the end of the talk. The first question is, who benefits from online health information? Does everybody benefit from going online for health information? Who may be harmed by health information? And I'm just going to talk briefly about anxiety. A lot of people experience important anxiety as a result of going online for health information. Is the online consent process valid for everyone? What I mean by consent is agreeing to undergo a medical intervention. So if I'm going online and I want to find out if I have dementia, do I have a clear understanding of what the test is going to provide for me? What kind of information it's going to give me? But also importantly, what kind of information it's not going to give me? So is that valid? Can people do this in their home, understand and take these interventions? How can we safeguard users' privacy? I mean, I don't really need to expand on that because we talked about that in the talk just prior to mine. And how can we mitigate conflicts of interest? So the online environment is a phenomenal place to make money. So we need to understand how this is going to conflict with the dispensing of medical advice. So moving ahead, I want to tell you a little bit about some research I did looking at online self-assessments. And the question we wanted to ask is, what is the quality of freely accessible tests for Alzheimer's disease? So what I mean by freely accessible is you can go to Google and punch in free dementia test. Those are the tests that we looked at. We don't look at tests that are password protected, for example, or where you need a physician recommendation. These are tests that anybody here can take. So our objective was to look at these tests among 3 dimensions, and I'll only talk about 2 of these today, but the 3 dimensions we looked at was scientific validity, so how useful are these tests to actually give any information about dementia. We looked at human-computer interaction items, which is how the person interacts with the test on the computer. And we look at ethics items. How ethical are these tests? How ethical is it to tell someone whether they have Alzheimer's disease or not through an online test, in particular if the test does not meet criteria for scientific validity. And the way we went about this is we did some information mining to access some unique tests that we could find online, and we randomized expert panels. So we had 2 expert panels, and each panel had a neuropsychologist, a clinician, either a geriatrician or a neurologist, a human-computer interaction specialist, and an ethicist. And the reason we had 2 panels, because one panel specifically had expertise with computerized tests, and so we felt that maybe there was a bias there. So we also recruited a panel of people that had expertise in aging and dementia, but no expertise in computers beyond that. So here are some characteristics of the tests that we found. What we found is that the tests were hosted on a whole variety of websites. So we ended up working with 16 unique tests, and they were hosted on news sites, on not-for-profit sites, academic websites had them, commercial sites had them, entertainment franchises, I'm sure you can probably guess which one. And the monthly traffic to these sites ranged from 200 to nearly 10 million unique visitors a month. So to give you an idea, 200 million visitors a month, we don't care about those websites. 10 million is a lot. That's a lot of visitors per month. So that's a website that's getting a lot of traffic, and a lot of people are seeing at least the tests. We did all the tests, each of them one by one, and we found that the estimated time to complete the test ranged from 2 minutes to an hour. So you are understanding correctly that in 2 minutes, you can find out online if you have Alzheimer's disease. 2 minutes. So we found 13 of the tests were designed to be self-administered, which is extremely problematic for reasons we'll touch on in just a minute. And 3 of the tests were designed to be administered by a proxy, so by a caregiver or a relative. We found the types of questions were either questionnaire-based, where people were asked questions about their risk factors, about their family history, and things like that. And 10 of the tests were performance-based, so you actually had to do either a cognitive task or a memory task. For some of the tests, actually both. And then what we did is we wanted to find out about the outcomes of the tests. So with our team of researchers, we did the tests as many times as needed to elicit all possible outcomes. So we did each of the tests really poorly to make sure we get the equivalent of a fail, and then we did each of the tests very well, or as well as we could, to ideally get a pass. And then we tried to hit all sort of the points in between. And then we coded for how the tests delivered its outcomes. And we found the majority of the tests had a 2 or 3 category outcome set. And what we mean by that is the test would either tell you, you have Alzheimer's disease or you don't have Alzheimer's disease. Or you are very much at risk, you are not at risk. Or see your doctor, don't see your doctor, those kinds of things. 3 of the tests were rated on a continuum where you got a unique number that matched your performance. So oftentimes these were for the performance-based test. And to give you an example, one of the tests scored you from 0 to 300. And it didn't tell you really what that number went, but you got a score. 2 of the tests were on a pass-fail continuum, so all you found out is whether you passed or failed the test. 1 of the tests you could only fail. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. And 1 of the tests had no outcome. So you had 20 or so questions, you answer the questions, and then that's it. There's no how to interpret your data, that was it. I suspect the webmaster forgot to copy and paste, the portion at the bottom of the test, but I can only speculate. So let's look at the data. Here I'm showing you some of the criteria we use to evaluate scientific validity. So I'll go through each of them. The content, so we wanted to see if the content of the questions was appropriate to give information about dementia. We wanted to see if the breadth of the test was sufficiently large to give any useful information about dementia. We wanted to see if the questions were based on current peer-reviewed evidence, so that's sort of the gold standard of scientific information. We wanted to see if those questions were really in line with what we do in the clinic today. And we wanted to see if the test had test-retest reliability, and what we mean by that is if I do the test 3 days in a row, will I get the same score? Or might I learn how to do the test? Or is the test just completely flaky and giving me a random score regardless of my performance? And you can see the ratings from 1, which is very poor, to 10, which is excellent. I think probably some of you hoped it was the other way around. But unfortunately, 1 is very poor. And you can see that on validity metrics, these tests scored poorly. And so the take-home message from that is these tests actually do not provide any useful information about cognition or dementia. You can do them if you think they're fun, but at the end of the day, it's not going to give you any useful information about your risk or your functioning or anything like that. Next, we looked at ethics, and yes, I know. So we looked at, these are 3 of the 8 ethics criteria we looked at. I'm not going to go through all 8, but here are some examples of the things we looked at. Conflict of interest, so is there a financial interest, for example? And we looked at the consent process, what that looked like for the tests, and we looked at whether the test told you, only if they told you, what they were going to do with the personal information you entered while doing a test. So for conflicts of interest, remember that test you could only fail 25 questions, does not matter what you answer. You can answer perfectly. Say you're 15 years old and nobody in your family has Alzheimer's. It would still pop up a big red warning, severe risk of Alzheimer's disease. But if you buy their supplements, the $59.99 every month for 3 months, then you'll be better. So that's an example of a conflict of interest that's really obvious. Right? We all recognize that that is a conflict of interest and that probably the test is not useful. But I have the benefit of having done the test about 100 times, so I know it always gives you the same answer, right? Most people will not do the test 100 times. Also, conflicts of interest can be a lot more subtle. So in this instance, it's pretty blatant. I'm trying to sell you supplements. But in some other instances, websites can make money by how they place ads, for example. So you might do a test and get an ad for a cognitive training program. That's a conflict of interest. In terms of consent, so again, this is the process of agreeing to undergo an intervention or a procedure. What we found is one of 2 things. Either there was no consent process at all whatsoever, or there was one, but it was 26 pages long in font size 3, and you had to scroll through the whole thing and click I agree. So how many of you in the room have read the last terms of agreements of iTunes? Raise your hand. Yeah, that's right. So we know from online behaviors that people don't do that. People don't read the fine print. And in this instance, it could be very important to read the fine print. For privacy, we found the same situation. Either there was no disclosure of how the private information was used, or there was a disclosure, but it was full of legal terms, again, pages and pages long. And of course, it was our job to read those things, and we found out through one of the tests that if you actually read the terms of agreement, you found out it was hosted by an insurance company. So here you are putting in your name, all of your, how many siblings do you have who have Alzheimer's disease? Here's my credit card information, here's all this personal information. And only if you're very diligent would you know that this is actually potentially going to be harmful to you in the end. So definitely some things to be careful here. And essentially the take-home message from our ethics portion of the study is that some of these tests are actually potentially harmful because the online environment is unregulated and there are no ethical standards to keep in mind. So we were very fortunate that from this study we got a lot of media coverage. And here's 3 examples of how this was covered in a Wall Street Journal and on Forbes. And one question that the reporters always ask me invariably is, what if there was a good test? What if I did a test and it was valid and it did give you good information and I paid attention to all 8 ethics items that you talk about in your paper? What if I did a good test? Then would you recommend people take it? And I'm very torn about this question because I think it is eventually going to be possible to develop a good test. The problem is that test is always going to sit in a pool of tests that are actually really terrible. And so now the burden falls on the internet user to determine which is the good test and which is the bad test. And we know that internet users of all ages are pretty bad at that. So we do not want to rely on the user to have to determine. I mean, we know, for example, Baycrest launched a test after we did the study. If you live in Toronto, you'll know Baycrest. You'll know it's a reputable organization. If you live in Michigan, you're going to do Dr. Oz's test. And Dr. Oz was in our sample, and it wasn't very good. So we can't say, yes, we're going to put a really good test out there and everybody's going to do it, because we know when people search things online, the top searches are not necessarily the best hits. So we can't say, well, it's up to them to find out the good one when all the other ones are potentially harmful. So let's go back to those ethical challenges for all of us in the room who put out information online, whether it be about residential care or about health or about anything. Here are some ways we can think about these ethical issues. So in terms of who benefits from online health information, how can we make sure that a maximum amount of people benefit from information? We can ensure broad reach by having the information being freely accessible. We can ensure that the information is of the highest quality by having local experts sort of vet the information. That's the Dr. So-and-so from state XYZ is not someone you can easily verify, but Dr. So-and-so from SFU or from UBC, that's the kind of people you want to go to vet your information. You want to pay special attention to readability. We recommend grade 8 level. There's a lot of websites on there that will tell you, you just copy and paste your text and it'll tell you what the readability of the test of the information is. And you want to pay attention to usability. So I haven't spent a lot of time on that, but you want to make the fonts large. You want to make the contrast really strong and things like that. Who is harmed by online health information? A lot of people can be harmed. I've given some examples of how the previous speakers also gave some examples of how online information can be harmful, but we can mitigate that. You can be careful about how you word your things as to not elicit anxiety. You can be careful about how you present your things. Don't use bright red flashing warning signs. That's not good. And you can use complementarity, and what we mean by that is always present the information in the context of a broader healthcare context. So say things like double check with your physician, or say things like here's a phone number you can call for local services in your area. Those are very important to sort of bring back the information into the healthcare context. How can we ensure the consent the consent process, is valid for everyone? Well, that's only going to be done through testing, right? We need to test what is this experience of consenting for something at home? How does this experience go if you have mild cognitive impairment or if you have early dementia? So we need to test these things. And if it's not valid, if people can't consent to things in their home, then we shouldn't have intervention online for those populations. How can we safeguard users' privacy? Having clear terms of agreement would be fantastic, and an appropriate font size, that would be a really good start. There's a lot of best practices out there for how to store online information, so everyone, I think, should pay attention to that. And how can we mitigate these conflicts of interest? It's our role as people who put information online to be transparent about who funds us, about who makes money out of the site, about whether you're getting ad revenue. All of these things are important to disclose clearly and in large font. But I think, as the previous speakers also touched on, it's going to be through education. I think it's going to be important to tell older adults, listen, if there's trying to sell you anything, a book, a supplement, anything else, a training program, that's a conflict of interest, and the information might not be unbiased. So I think we really need to work on that, because ultimately the online environment is unlikely to ever be regulated. So we're not really moving towards regulation, so we'll have to use other strategies. And with that, I want to acknowledge the co-investigators who worked on this, the students who worked very hard on this. Tanya Feng has a poster at the very entrance of the room on online information about the prevention of Alzheimer's disease, which I'll be presenting at AAIC in DC, and collaborators who help with data mining and all the funding agencies. Thank you.
So thanks very much, Julie. Does somebody have a question? We have somebody.
I have a question. I'm very interested in the data you talk about and the whole...
You use the mics so the people behind you can hear you.
Sorry. Can everyone hear me now? Yes, I'm very interested in the online world and what you're talking about. And what I find really interesting is that you've presented all the problems, but you haven't mentioned a solution. And because the world is expensive to get healthcare information, what do you suggest people to do in this context?
Well, the first thing I always suggest, and 15 minutes is quick, but I am happy to report that I work closely with physicians to help them with the information that they then pass on and the sites that they promote and things like that. But what I think people should do if they want to self-diagnose is to not do that. So that's sort of my spiel for now, until we can resolve these issues of consent and of privacy and of conflicts of interest. I think there's very good sources of health information online. I think it's a very good idea to go to websites like the Alzheimer's Society of Canada and things like that. And I'm not saying that we should distrust all health information online, but self-assessment tests in particular, my recommendation is to halt that. And I'm not suggesting that there'll never be a viable option for e-health or for remote populations and so on. I just think we need to work a little bit harder at tackling the ethical issues before we unroll these sort of broad-reaching initiatives. But there are solutions, and sort of these issues that I brought up on that last slide about ethics is really just to start. But there are ways that we can, I think, primarily through education, and we talk about older adults, but I would like to see the education start in elementary school. Right? And to make sure that these are skills that people have for their whole lives after that. And I think through education and through paying attention to these issues, eventually, like I said, we're not going to halt this. You're right. This is not going away. Healthcare is going to be delivered online increasingly and more so all the time. And so I just want everybody to sort of take a step back and pay attention to the ethics of what they're doing.
Thank you.
Any other? Yes, please.
That's an excellent presentation, Julie. Thank you. I'm wondering, can you speak a bit more about the conflict of interest in relation to advertising on sites? Because you're talking about it in the context of a test. But, I mean, many of us here will have websites that have advertising on them. And when you say conflict of interest, I was concerned because I thought, oh, what's the proper way to go about dealing with advertising?
Yeah, so advertising is sort of a part of online content, and again, it's not something we're going to get away from, and I think in many instances it could be a very healthy part of online content. The problem with advertising is that depending on who your advertising provider is, but in many instances, you make more money from your ads if people spend more time on your website or if they click through more pages on the same website. And sometimes that will lead people to post content, what we call clickbait, essentially, that is only there to entice people to stay longer or to click within the site, you know, those slideshows and so on. And if you're pushing hard to keep people on the site and so on, sometimes the quality of the content decreases. And this is something we've seen both on some of these websites with the tests and also on websites that just have information about health more broadly. And so we're not suggesting that it's bad to have ads. A lot of people have a viable business through advertisement. What I would like to see is a disclosure that there is some revenue being made from the ads. And increasingly people are doing that. They're putting a disclosure somewhere on the website saying, I get a revenue every time you click this ad, or, you know, website generously supported by so-and-so advertising. I think that's really just a first step to say, I make money when you visit my site. And that's a tool that then people can use to determine whether they want to trust the information or not trust the information.
Thank you, Julie.
You mentioned some nonprofit sites were assessed as well. Our working assumption is that the Alzheimer's Association in the U.S. and Alzheimer's Society in Canada are a very good source. For those sites, were they evaluated as well?
The million-dollar question. So thank you for bringing this. So I can tell you that for the longest time, we did not want to say who was in our sample. For obvious reasons. After presenting the data, initially I got a lot of really angry emails from companies who put sites for memory tests. And so initially we were very shy with disclosing the information, but when the time came to publish, then it sort of became inevitable. And so I can now tell you that neither the Alzheimer's Society of Canada nor the Alzheimer's Association in the US have a test. They both, in fact, have a policy against online self-diagnosing, which I am very happy. But there are other not-for-profits out there, and so some of them did have some tests. Yeah.
Okay, we're out of time. In fact, we're a couple minutes past time. So thank you all again for listening, and thank you all to the panelists here. Great presentation.